Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to take that spark of curiosity you have and, well, hopefully turn it into some real insight. Today we're embarking on a pretty fascinating exploration, digging into LL research and specifically this book, Tilting at Windmills, an interview with LL research. So our mission today is sort of twofold. First, we want to unpack the really unique history of LL research itself. And maybe more importantly, pull out the deeper lessons, the advice for living our best lives, stuff revealed through the founder's own experiences and words. Get ready, because we're exploring a philosophy that basically says the path is always within. It really embodies that phrase from one source, Namaste, I am you, and you are me.
Exactly. I mean, we're looking at material that isn't afraid to ask those huge questions, right? Why are we here? Who are we? All of that. And it offers this framework. It's not just a belief system. It's really a way of being with humility, purity, and yeah, a bit of what they actually called foolhardiness.
Okay, so foolhardiness. That sounds interesting. Let's start at the beginning then.
Yeah.
How did this all get started? It wasn't just LL research from day one, was it?
No, not at all. It really grew out of one man's relentless search, Donald Tully Elkins. His research kicked off way back in 1955. And it was sparked by a pretty well-known UFO incident, the Captain Thomas Mantell crash in '48. The pilot who died chasing something unexplained.
Right, I remember hearing about that one. So how did Elkins approach it? He wasn't just collecting newspaper clippings, I take it.
Definitely not. What's fascinating is Don was a physicist, incredibly smart. And he wasn't just interested in, blurry photos. He wanted direct experiences. So he actually learned to fly planes himself.
Wow, really?
Yeah, specifically so he could go interview people who reported actual contact, not just, seeing lights in the sky. His aim was partly empirical research, gathering data, but also helping people see there was more to life than met the eye. And he initially envisioned this as a very structured sort of scientific experiment in channeling.
A scientific experiment in channeling. How did that work?
Well, his own interest got really piqued by something called the Brown Notebook, which suggested he could receive his own messages. So he wanted to collect data on channeling, prove it scientifically almost. But he was very focused on purity, so he didn't initially tell his early volunteers the full aim of the experiment.
Interesting. Okay, so that initial scientific drive eventually leads to the formation of LL Research in 1970.
That's right, 1970. He founded it as a nonprofit with Carla L, Rueckert and James McCarty. And over, 5 decades plus, they built up this huge library, spirituality, philosophy, metaphysics, channeling really at the heart of it all.
And ethically, they decided early on to make everything available for free, right?
Yes, absolutely. Which was, pretty ahead of its time, especially before the internet made that sort of thing easier. A real commitment.
And this book title, Tilting at Windmills, it perfectly sums up their whole vibe, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, it's that classic English idiom, right? Don Quixote. Pursuing a noble goal, maybe an impossible one, fighting imaginary enemies. And it's not just a title. Their actual logo has a knight and windmills. It speaks volumes about their, let's say, determined idealism.
Carla herself used that phrase, didn't she? Describing her work as tilting at windmills, trying to dream the impossible dream. What was that specific dream for her?
Yeah, she was quite clear about it. The impossible dream for her was, bringing truth, beauty, love, light, and understanding to Earth.
Yeah.
And not just bringing it, but making it the way people live. That was the goal.
That's ambitious.
Hugely ambitious. And she knew it felt impossible. She'd point to how the world wags, the news cycle, if it pleads, it leads.
Yeah.
And she learned in college, pragmatically, that politics often involved having to lie, something she said she just couldn't do. So there's this constant tension, holding this incredibly high ideal against the backdrop of, reality.
That honesty is really striking. Okay, let's talk about the team itself. Raw, their main channeled source, apparently said they searched a long time to find the right instrument, and that this group's spectrograph matches our sample. Spectrograph. What does that even mean in this context? It sounds like some unique energetic frequency they shared.
That's pretty much it. It's a profound idea, right? That specific qualities of mind, body, and spirit could align, creating this rare conduit for information. Ra talked about a spectrograph of love, wisdom, and power. And each of them, Dawn, Carla, Jim, brought something distinct but complementary. It was the combination that worked.
So let's break that down. Tell us about Don Elkins first. Carla said his intellect was maybe 3 times hers. But there was more to him than just brains, right?
Oh, absolutely. His intellect was formidable, no question. But he was also described as a deeply melancholic person. Apparently, when he was 26, he made this conscious choice to cultivate indifference to emotions.
Indifference. as a spiritual practice.
Exactly. For him, it was strict discipline to maintain a level mind, to not be swayed. It meant he didn't really give compliments or criticism. He was just indifferent.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. But what's fascinating is that the Rand contact actually seemed to lift that melancholy for a time. It made him excited to communicate, which was a big shift. Sadly, though, his journey took a really difficult turn later. He descended into what was diagnosed as psychotic depression with paranoid features. Carla eventually saw his struggle and his death by suicide as a kind of noble sacrifice. She felt it was connected to ensuring her safety and happiness. It's incredibly complex and tragic.
Deeply poignant. Okay, and Carla Rueckert, a child prodigy, reading at 3, but also dealing with immense physical challenges her whole life.
Yeah, Carla's story is just remarkable. She could read incredibly early, spoke French, had this very imaginative childhood she called her magical forest, and she had this deep connection to Jesus from a young age, calling him Holly, but physically. She was born with birth defects, suffered chronic, really deep pain constantly. She literally said she lived by spirit alone.
How did she maintain positivity through that?
That's the extraordinary part. Her dogged positivity, as it's described, she truly saw every single day as a gift. Her attitude was like waking up each morning feeling like you're at a party and your job is to determine the best costume. Just finding joy despite it all.
That's an amazing perspective.
And she attributed it to her inner work prayer, tuning, gratitude, forgiveness, constantly turning to the Creator. She even believed her physical limits were something she chose before birth, pre-incarnational programming, she called it. A way to keep her focused inward on her spiritual path, a self-designed catalyst for growth.
Wow, talk about taking ownership. And then there's Jim McCarty, the loner, the late bloomer. But Ross said his forte was power. What kind of power?
Right. Jim described himself as a bit of a loner, maybe finding his spiritual path later than the others. He developed focus through things like sports and self-sufficiency. He even built his own log cabin.
Okay.
The power Ra mentioned wasn't about dominance or control. It was more about the productive use of his energy and will, especially in supporting the group. His role became absolutely crucial during the Ra contact. He literally acted as a battery for Carla.
A battery? How?
They discovered that specific sexual energy exchanges between him and Carla actually increased the energy available for the channeling. It made the sessions longer, more sustainable. It was about elevating the work's energy, a conscious choice. And his deep compassion really showed in his forgiveness of self and his total dedication to caring for Carla later in life. He said choosing that life with them was the best decision he ever made.
So these 3 really different people came together. Jim called them a magnet and an iron filing, drawn together.
Exactly. It wasn't something they had to force. They were pulled together by this shared desire to serve. Their differences weren't conflicts. They were strengths that complemented each other. Dawn's mind, Carla's heart and spirit, Jim's grounding energy. It created this harmony, this unique spectrograph that just was. It didn't need effort.
Okay, so we have the team. Let's get into the nuts and bolts of the Ra contact itself.
Okay.
How did these sessions actually work? You mentioned narrow band communication.
Right. It was very precise. Carly would go into a deep trance for her. It often just felt like falling asleep. Meanwhile, Dawn would ask the questions they'd meticulously prepared beforehand, and Jim would record everything. They had protocols like nightly meditations discussing the questions for the next day. It was structured.
And you mentioned the energy exchange aspect being crucial.
Yes, that discovery was key. The sexual energy transfer between Carla and Jim directly boosted her stamina for channeling. Again, it wasn't personal gratification. It was a conscious, energetic practice to support the demanding work and lengthen the time they could sustain the contact because it took a huge physical toll on Carla.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Now, besides the sheer energy required, they also dealt with something intense called psychic greeting. What was that about? Sounds ominous.
It was a major challenge, yeah. They described it as interference, or maybe temptations, from negatively oriented entities. Ra specifically named the Orion Empire.
Orion, like the constellation.
Sort of the source location, yes. Forces operating on the opposite polarity, service to self, trying to draw others away from service to others.
Right.
But Ra was clear. These entities couldn't just barge in. They could only influence LO research through pre-existing distortions. meaning they could only amplify existing weaknesses, doubt, or imbalances within Dawn, Carla, or Jim. They couldn't create problems out of nothing. So the greetings often took the form of temptation, appealing to ego, offering fame, money, power, anything to distract them from their path.
Did it manifest physically?
For Carla, yes. She
Yeah.
reported things like a dangerous illusion while driving, seeing no traffic when the road was busy, and definitely an intensification of her physical pain. But the core teaching, the way to handle it, was always consistent. Meet these greetings with an open heart, with compassion. Avoid that us versus them mentality. Trust that love itself is the strongest shield.
Meeting negativity with an open heart. That takes incredible discipline. This brings us to something really profound and tragic you mentioned earlier, the deleterious energy transfer between Carl and Don. What exactly happened there?
Right, this is a really heavy but important part of the story. It happened when Carla, out of immense love and empathy for Don's suffering, especially when he was away in Georgia, really struggling internally, consciously offered to take on his distress, his problems.
She offered to take his pain.
Energetically, yes. Rajan described this act, this intensive commitment to blending into an harmonious group, as the apex of sacrifice, a deeply magical, energetic act. But this transfer, combined with intense negative psychic greeting aimed at Don and his own internal struggles, that poisonous doubt, as his heart finally opened after years of being guarded, it created this perfect storm. Tragically, it seems to have contributed significantly to his mental decline and his eventual suicide. It's a stark reminder of the magical reality they were working within, the responsibilities, and the unforeseen costs.
That's incredibly sobering. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Beyond this extraordinary, sometimes painful history, what are the core takeaways? The practical lessons from LL research, from Carla, Dawn, and Jim's lives that we can use on our own paths?
I think the absolute core message, repeated constantly, is that the path is always within. And alongside that, the idea that everything is the creator meeting the creator. The fundamental advice boils down to something simple but profound. Know yourself, accept yourself, become the creator. That's what I meant by the discipline of the personality.
Discipline of the personality? Okay, sounds good. But what does that actually look like day to day? How do you practice that?
It starts with a constant attempt to seek to share the love of the creator as it is known to the inner self. It's not about big, flashy actions necessarily. It begins with radical self-honesty, really looking at your own patterns, your biases, your distortions, as they call them, not to judge them, but to understand and integrate them. Then, through practices like meditation or just quiet reflection, turning into that creator within you, so you start to cultivate self-knowledge. And from that place, you gain the ability to open the self to the other self without hesitation. You start radiating your essence, your heart.
And relationships were key too, right?
Right. Hugely important. Relationships first. There's a story where Carla actually shut down an online community they'd built because, as she put it, ugliness had entered in and she couldn't make it sweet again.
Wow, shutting down a whole project.
Yeah. It shows how much they valued harmony and genuine connection over just, keeping a project going. Sweetness of connection mattered more.
That makes sense. Now, a lot of people connect with the idea of being a wanderer, feeling like you don't quite belong here, maybe a bit lonely or homesick for somewhere else.
Mhm.
Does this philosophy offer anything for that feeling?
Oh, absolutely. The message for wanderers is incredibly validating. It's basically, you are your service. Just keeping your heart open is your service. There's no pressure to perform big, world-changing deeds. Your presence, your willingness to be here and hold love, that is your service. It reminds us that all service is equal, whether it looks dramatic or tiny. It's about being.
Being, not just doing. I like that. They also talked a lot about discipline, didn't they? Not just their schedule, but mental and spiritual focus.
Yes, they saw the spiritual path as straight and narrow, but not in a punishing, restrictive way.
How so?
More like focusing energy efficiently, like light through a lens, concentrating your intention, your attention, avoiding dissipation. And meditation was key for them. They called it the easiest and quickest and most available way to connect with that original self, that great inner silence that's underneath all the mental chatter.
And finally, how they chose to share all this information seems really significant too.
Yeah.
No pushing it on anyone.
Not at all. Huge emphasis on free will. They never proselytized. They actually preferred people to search to find us. Why? Because they believe the search itself, the seeking, is crucial for spiritual growth.
It shows real humility.
It does. They even said if the material ever became irrelevant, they'd just quietly shut or walk away. No ego attached to it. It's all about serving genuine seekers, building community, and trusting that those of like mind which together seek shall far more surely find. They weren't chasing fame, they valued obscurity in a way.
What an incredible arc. From Don Elkins hunting UFO data to this profound spiritual philosophy lived out through the intense, real lives of Don, Carla, and Jim. Their story really shows that embracing all of who we are, the blind spots, shortcomings, weaknesses, warts and all, as they put it, isn't a weakness. It's actually the path to real strength of heart.
Absolutely. What strikes me most is that unwavering commitment to inner work, that discipline that allowed them to radiate love even when things were incredibly difficult, physically and emotionally. It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that maybe the universe isn't conspiring against us, even in hardship. Maybe, like with Dawn, it's offering the material and opportunity for our own growth, however tough that looks at the time.
Yeah. It definitely makes you think about how we can cultivate maybe some of that basic cheerfulness Carla had, even when things are hard, and how we apply that relationship's first principle at our own messy lives. Their legacy isn't just words on a page, it's how they lived it, the challenges, the sacrifices, the love. So as you listening reflect on all this, maybe consider this thought they put forward. The truth of it is you have ultimate power over your open heart. If that's true, what does that mean for your impossible dream? How might your own unique spectrograph align with what you're truly here to be?